Welcome to Inside West Point, Ideas that Impact. I'm Brigadier General Shane Reeves, the Dean of the United States Military Academy at West Point. Through a series of discussions, we will show you a different side of West Point, where we will make even our most complex initiatives accessible to broad audiences, and give you an inside view to our cross-disciplinary work, which is being applied throughout the world.
Okay, sir, here we go.
All right.
Season 3. When you started your career, did you envision your face and voice being splattered across social media and podcast platforms?
I never envisioned my face being splattered this way.
Okay. So then let's start on a serious note. Which do you look forward to the most? Recording a podcast episode or recording a spirit video?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I love them both equally, but the spirit videos are probably the way I get to show my artistic side the best, and really get to speak to the people.
The people.
Yeah, I love the spirit videos.
Army sports fans.
I love Army sports fans.
Right.
I love cadets, and it's the most fun thing I do during the week. However, the podcast I think is incredibly impactful, and my hope is that season 3 will continue to build on a lot of the momentum we've had from the previous seasons and really help those that listen get an inside perspective on West Point. I think we have a very exciting lineup for season 3, where we touch on all the various pillars at West Point, but also talk to some very interesting people that have insights that are timeless and really important. The other thing about the podcast, though, is it's not simply me talking to guests. I mean, I have to thank so many people, from all those that help produce it and all the production work that takes place, all the editing, the guests, of course, the guests who come in and give their time and their insights. Perhaps there's no one I'd thank more than actually you, because everything on here comes from you. It makes it easy.
So let's get into season 2.
All right.
Before we dive into season 3, what's coming up, let's reflect a little bit,
Yeah.
right? We've learned that from some of our recent episodes. So what are some standout moments from season 2?
Season 2 was amazing. I mean, it was, to be honest, every single episode, I was, in my mind, like, that was fascinating. That might be the best one I've ever had. Because the conversations just flowed. The one, and I could talk about all of them. The one that really jumps out to me was when we talked to Dr. Jeff Peterson about character development. The entire academy is about developing leaders of character. When we talk about West Point, we will talk about the academic program or the physical program or the military program, but all of that rests on a foundation of character. And nothing matters more at West Point than character development. And character education is challenging. It's a very difficult thing to do. And I think Dr. Peterson really was able to succinctly tell us what that means, and has done a tremendous job working with our team to build that out across the academy. I really appreciated the conversation on character, because I think it not just resonates with me, I think it resonates with a lot of people. The importance of character when it's time to make a difficult decision. There's certain things that we'll say that will come from, for example, a West Point of a previous era, but do the harder right over the easier wrong. Don't say a half truth when you can say, when the full truth is available. Dr. Peterson really emphasized the importance of character in leadership, and helping to understand how we build them to do the right thing in all circumstances. One of my favorite quotes from that was when he said, "They're doing it whether they're being watched or not. I'm going to do this because this is who I am." And he was talking about what we want our cadets, or we want officers to do, which is, they're not doing it for affirmation. They're not doing it for personal gain. They're not doing it for some transactional reason. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do. To me, it just gave me chills when he was talking about that.
Agreed. And it's something that sounds simple, but it's really hard to do in practice when you're faced with challenges that seem insurmountable.
Yes. And you really think through those situations in your own life or your own experiences where you've had something happen, and it's like a golden moment. It's a moment you're like, oh, I need to do this, but this would be so much easier, or I can rationalize the reasons I should do this. And what Dr. Peterson was saying is that West Point graduates, in their mind, they'd be like, nope, I do this. I have to do this. And there's a direct connection to this and warfighting and lethality and readiness, because when you show character, you can be trusted when you're asked for your honest opinion on a battlefield.
Right.
You can be asked when a senior commander tells you to do something to give your honest feedback, recognizing you're in a hierarchical organization and you'll execute as necessary. You can be trusted with the idea of mission command. Hey, Lieutenant, go off and do this. And you know that they're going to do it to the best of their ability because you don't need to watch them.
Right.
That is like the advantage of the U.S. Army officer.
That brings me back to the General McMaster
Yeah.
episode where we talked about the warrior ethos and wanting to strengthen and reinstill the warrior ethos. And it seems like there's likely a strong connection here between the Peterson episode and the McMaster episode.
Yeah, so General McMaster, I'll read you
Sure.
a quote from that episode, but I'll highlight. I've known General McMaster, as we talked about on the podcast, since I was a cadet, and I've worked for him, and we've maintained a close relationship and friendship. And he has been saying this since I've known him. And basically, he says, it's our ethos, our commitment to one another, the cohesion we have in units that creates a bulwark against fear because we want to disintegrate the other group by our military prowess. I think he's spot on. I think it is that ethos that holds us together, that commitment to each other, and that commitment really to a higher calling, right? And in this case, it's both the profession of arms as well as our nation. But his ability to emphasize that does connect directly to what Dr. Peterson said, because at the foundation of all that is character. I think you could look at some other episodes from season 2 that complement what General McMaster and Dr. Peterson were saying, whether it's Colonel Baskerville, who's the head of the Department of English and World Languages, or General Vince Brooks. They both talked about whether it's communication or having another perspective that helps build on that warrior ethos that General McMaster talked about, and also how that develops character. So General Brooks talked about the humility that comes from engaging in another culture and recognizing that you don't know everything. And Colonel Baskerville talks about cross-cultural competencies and the ability to communicate with others and the ability to see things from another's perspective. That helps us as leaders build a cohesive team. When we talk about challenges or we talk about why do we want to do this, it's very simple. It is about warfighting. It's the ability to take a group of people, have them work together, and not just fight, but win against an adversary on behalf of your nation. And you can't do that if you don't have leaders of character. You can't do that if you're not a cohesive unit. You can't do that if you're not committed to the warrior ethos.
Thinking broader now in season 2, were there other major themes that emerged?
Yeah, there was a really interesting ongoing thread or theme on mentorship and development. So there were faculty that talked, like Dr. Nageli, Professor Sheets, Dr. Malinowski, that showcased just how important of a role cadets and junior faculty play. So the level of access and impact these leaders gain through our education model, paired with the fresh perspectives we continuously infuse into the program, is just wonderful. And that's what really fires me up as the dean, right? It really fires me up to be able to see our faculty connect with cadets or connect with each other, and not just educate, but be willing to develop the cadets. And that development comes in lots of different ways. Sometimes that development is you're not at the right place, or you're not in the right uniform, you were late, and so there's going to be consequences. And sometimes that development comes through more personal mentorship. Hey, you want to know what it's like to be a platoon leader? Let me talk about my experiences. Hey, you want to know what it's like to deal with something really difficult in your personal life? Let me talk to you about how you can navigate those things. And so the entire staff, faculty, and coaches that are at West Point are all in on developing cadets, and not just in a way that they're smart or they're accomplished physically, but that they're actually going to walk out and understand what it means to mentor others, to lead others. And that all comes through that thread, that mentorship development thread that we saw.
And how to navigate uncertain environments.
That's a great point. I think that the thing that we are recognizing and we have seen and we've talked about consistently is the only certainty in the global or the geopolitical landscape or the national security landscape is uncertainty.
Right.
We have no idea what the threat is going to look like. We can have some ideas, we can prognosticate a bit, but we don't really know what the threat is. We don't really know what the challenges are. We don't really know when or what's going to happen. And so the key is helping them prepare for uncertainty. And that's one of the things West Point does really well. West Point does trains, but it also educates. And there's a little bit of a nuance there. Training is when you're doing things repetitively so you get good at it. Land nav, shoot a weapon, those tactical skills you need to be proficient. But you also need your officers to be able to think their way through a problem. You really need them to be able to be creative and innovative and entrepreneurial when they're faced with a challenge. And I've said this many times, but that's the key for West Point. The key for West Point is helping our graduates be able to go into an environment where it's extremely complex, where there's tons of ambiguity, where it's just grayness. And then also know they're going to be challenged because they may not have the technology to rely on. I mean, everything might go black. It might be confusing. They might not have access to senior leaders, but we're still going to expect them to move out and win. And again, as General McMaster said, they can't disintegrate and run away because of their fears. Right. They have to be committed to the warrior ethos, but they also have to be smart enough to think their way through the obstacle or the problem that faces them, because if they don't, they're going to lose.
Thinking about that and thinking about some of our military faculty members who've been on the show, what is a fresh perspective when we think about how we navigate this rapidly evolving world?
That's a great question, because West Point, like all of society, like all the Department of Defense, like our adversaries, is wrestling with a revolution. And that revolution, in my opinion, is artificial intelligence. Sure. Colonel Chris Mayer came on and discussed and explored the intersection between leadership and what many are calling the age of AI. And I thought it was not just fascinating, but extremely timely. That we're not asking our graduates just to be AI comfortable or AI conversant. I want our graduates to be AI enabled. I want them to learn to use the technology in such a way that it gives us the asymmetric advantage. I hear people say this quite often. We're not looking for a fair fight. This isn't meant to be some sort of peer-on-peer adversary conflict. I want it to be dominance. I want the U.S. Army to enter into any type of conflict knowing that they have the superior technology and it's not going to be close. Right. Not looking, again, for a fair fight. And so I think when Colonel Mayer was speaking, it was eye-opening. It was really eye-opening because he was discussing really his insights on the critical aspects of human skills and where there's the outer limits of technology and where the human remains indispensable, and figuring out how that all works together. Because again, our graduates have to understand the art of leadership. They have to understand things like presence, right, and how to communicate and how you build a cohesive team. But they also need to learn how to use AI, because our adversaries are learning how to use AI. And it's not just learning, are quickly adapting. And so our graduates need to understand how to use AI, but also maintain those skills that are unique to humans. And he said, and this is a great comment, while technical skills are necessary, human skills have become more important as people do things machines can't do. And that stuck with me as we consider developing our future leaders.
Especially, you often talk about how someone who's graduating this year, they're not just focused on warfighting this year, but they need to be thinking about how is all of this going to transform the next 30, 40 years, right? Towards the end of their career, when they're strategic decision makers for the military, what are those human skills at that point?
One thing is, as you were saying that, you're right. I've said that many times, but here's where I would change it. They can't be thinking 20, 30 years. They need to be thinking 2 years, 3 years. I mean, everything is changing so fast. Yeah. And so they can't be scared or defensive. They have to be comfortable with those adaptations and rely on the technology, yet still have those intangible human skills that are required of an officer. And so Colonel Marrow's conversation in that intersection was really spot on.
So that's a good point, because it's not just a tomorrow problem.
No.
It's something they have to focus on now.
And if we're not doing it right now, then we're not preparing them. That means we have to be willing to adapt. We have to be willing to evolve. We have to be flexible. We can't be too tradition bound, though I love all of our West Point traditions. Sure. I do. I love them all. But you can't be too reliant on those, because we need to be thinking about when they walk across that stage, one of the skills they really need to have is the ability to use technology to our advantage.
So thinking about that, your annual theme, which we've basically at a midpoint, we've covered about half of the last season. We're going into season 3, focused on the human and the machine, yep, leadership in the emerging battlefield. One, why is that theme so critical, and what are some takeaways that we've learned so far from the season?
That theme wasn't my idea, but it's brilliant. Whoever came up with that theme was brilliant, right? Because
you put together a great story.
Yeah, the team came up with a good one, because that the human and the machine has that theme has emerged in various conversations from an eclectic group of experts, but they all come back to how important this is, and particularly those involving artificial intelligence and how it's going to integrate into military operations. And I say how it's going to, and I should rephrase that, how it is
Right.
integrating into military operations. So a few of the season 2 episodes come to mind. And I already talked about Colonel Mares and about the human dimension of artificial intelligence and leadership. Colonel Besco's discussion on generative AI in cyber and intelligence, he made it very relatable, but is a really, really complicated topic. It was interesting. He was talking about how we digest information on social media, the ubiquity of data, and how data is processed and analyzed, and how it's used.
Or sometimes how it's defined oddly when he talked about rolling out a filing cabinet
Well,
when he went to
true.
evaluate data.
He's talking about how it is, as you stated, how it's even defined. It made me think a little bit about, even when you think about targeting, and he was talking about how data, the definition of it has changed over a period of time. Well, for the longest time, you could only target things that were a military objective. You still can only target things that are a military objective. And a military objective is, by definition, under the law of armed conflict, an object by its location, nature, use, or purpose makes an effective military contribution, and its neutralization or partial neutralization offers a definite military advantage. Well, as technologies become so important and data has become critical, a question becomes, can you target data? The idea of a military objective always had like a physical connotation, but data is just as important. And what does that mean? And I think this is the way the world's evolving. Data is more important than the building it's in now, right?
If it's in a building.
If it's in a building, right? And so he really his discussion really started to emphasize the importance of understanding the capabilities and limitations of artificial intelligence and leadership scenarios, but it also generated a lot of other thought in my mind, which is, and how do we operate in this new world? Colonel Cook's discussion on space was amazing. Some will know that we've started a space community of practice at West Point. What does that really mean? It's really meant to develop a interdisciplinary approach to the space domain to ensure that West Point's producing officers that are capable of connecting land warfare to space operations. And what we've seen through really Ukraine, but you can also see a bit in the Middle East conflict, that the nation state, and maybe it won't be a nation state, it could be a non-state actor, but the belligerent, we'll call it, who dominates or controls space has not just a distinct advantage, but a level of superiority that can't be supplanted. His emphasis on how leaders must navigate a landscape where human intuition and machine precision converge, and he talked a lot about the vulnerabilities of space assets, how that's perhaps an exposed flank for us, and that how space is becoming quickly militarized, and it really generated not just conversation, but like, we need to get going, we need to go fast. All those conversations and how the integration of technology into both leadership, but also the integration with the human, were very timely and important.
What you've highlighted here is just, I mean, wow. You showed how there's just this wide range of topics in one season alone. And something that resonated with me as you're talking about that is we recently had General Retired Thomas, not in this studio, but he was appearing with you in a fireside chat in front of hundreds of faculty and cadets and staff. And you've had this growing trend of turning your fireside chats into podcast episodes. So curious there as to why you do that and what you think we're really gaining from it.
I like to do it because then I can take Friday off.
I don't think you've ever taken a
Friday. Right. So
or a Saturday or something.
The reason is, it's the whole point of the podcast. The title is Inside West Point, Ideas to Impact, but the idea is to give listeners access. And these senior leaders are willing to come and speak in these fireside chats to cadets or to staff and faculty. And they have decades of experience, not just in terms of leading some of the most complicated or complex organizations, but also they've been at the cutting edge of so many of the trends that are defining the current era, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's in national security, whether it's in technology. In my mind, I'm like, how often do you get to hear a candid conversation from a senior leader on a topic, and they're willing to do it? And they're willing to do it not just for our cadets, but also for a broader audience. And again, one of the reasons we have this podcast is to show the excellence that resides at West Point, to show the the laser focus we have on fighting and winning our nation's wars, and our ability to bring in those very senior individuals who have a lot of subject matter expertise to speak to those who are going to be fighting.
Looking ahead to season 3, I mean, what are you most excited about?
Oh my gosh, there is an incredible lineup of individuals who have graciously been willing to be part of this podcast, whether it's in a fireside chat that we turn into a podcast, or it's more of the formal podcast where we do a Q&A in the studio. Those speakers range from obviously our faculty, we're going to bring in some of the individuals from our athletic departments. We have external speakers. Of course, we have General Scotty Miller, class of 1983, retired 4-star. And the season will kick off with Mr. Elon Musk, who has incredible insights into the future of warfare. And some of those insights can be a little bit terrifying. I think he's right, and I think it's important. And he really, again, emphasizes the human and machine, and that theme we've been hitting on all year. Like, he talks directly about the importance of figuring out how the human and machine operate to be successful on a modern battlefield.
And you mentioned sports and competition. So can you maybe speak to where you see that connection and why you wanted to have a few episodes related to that?
When I think about sports, West Point and athletics have a very long history, right? There's always been a physical component to being an officer.
Every cadet and athlete.
Every cadet's an athlete. The 31st Superintendent, General Douglas MacArthur, when he was superintendent from 1919 to 1922, made it an emphasis, both in terms of developing NCAA or Division I sports at West Point, but also cadets competing on the fields of friendly strife, is his famous quote, where we sow our field, the seeds of victory. This connection to how we develop leaders of character at West Point is a really important part of the West Point leadership experience. But really, what's interesting to me as the dean is how performance on the athletic field as part of a team really translates into intellectual development. So if you think about the football team, you might be the quarterback, you might be on the offensive line, you might be a wide receiver. Everybody has their particular role. They have to know what they're doing. They have to execute their particular responsibilities at their position. They have to work as a team. They have to read their opponent. They have to understand strategy. They have to understand each other. There has to be ability to communicate. There has to be cohesion. There's a warrior ethos component to all that. But they have to also not just execute in their particular position, but they have to be able to read and understand what is across from them when it comes to their adversaries. That is no different than what we do in the classroom. In the classroom, we are increasingly building interdisciplinary teams of cadets and faculty to work on these incredibly difficult and complicated problems. And those problems might not have an answer. There might not be a solution, but they are racing to some extent against others. There's a competition in these capstone projects. There's an interdisciplinary component. There's a team component, but it really means that they really have to work together to solve a very difficult problem. And that's not that dissimilar from sports, or you could pick Sandhurst or some of these other things. And so I think it's really an important part of the West Point experience. And I think as you start to hear some of our coaches or the master of the sword, you hear them talk about what they do, you start to go, oh, this is actually developing the cadets, not just physically, but also intellectually.
You have this wide range of topics, and it's interesting how you can find this connection to the academic program, to intellectual development. What has inspired you to pick the particular topics that you pick, or thinking of what do you keep in mind when you do decide to pick topics moving forward?
What I keep in mind, number one, is we need to fight and win. And so the topics that resonate to me are those that are directly connected to our ability to go forth, fight on behalf of our nation, and win on the modern and future battle space. Stop, period. But it's really not that hard to pick a topic. I mean, there's just so much excellence around West Point. I could leave here, walk into someone's office and be like, what are you working on? Oh, hey, sir, it's not a big deal. I'm just happen to be developing the principles for the application of artificial intelligence in an international scenario. Oh, why don't you come in here and sit down and we'll have a conversation? I mean, it isn't difficult. There's topics that range from AI to space to leadership to all these other things that just naturally resonate when we're focused on this, fighting and winning. The number one thing I think about when I pick someone to come speak or I pick a topic, it is I want those listening to understand that West Point that's our job, right? We are developing leaders of character so they can fight and win on our nation's behalf.
And lastly, what messages do you want listeners to take away from your show?
There's a couple of messages. One would be that leadership and innovation are inseparable. The second one would be, as we look into the future, it's important for those listening to understand that West Point and all those affiliated with West Point, whether it's our staff, our faculty, our coaches, our cadets, are laser focused on fighting and winning our nation's wars, and that we're preparing them to do that regardless of what the battlefield of the future may look like. And there are lots of different new domains of warfare, space and cyber being the two newest, but we're preparing them. I think I'd want to let people know that no matter what corner you look at in West Point, you're going to find excellence. And again, that excellence is directly connected to West Point's obligation to ensure our graduates can fight and win. And then I think lastly, I would say, I hope the lessons and conversations that we're having will help others navigate their own leadership challenges and help them find opportunities in their own institutions or enterprises to try to be better.
I think we can use this 2 minutes for a quick ad hoc rapid fire.
Okay. You flipped it on me.
I did flip
right.
it on you.
Okay.
Here you go. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. Morning person or evening person?
Oh, I'm an evening person.
Okay.
I'm the worst Army officer in the world. I'm like the worst.
Most challenging course you've ever taken?
Oh, physics 2 when I was
I might be right with you there, sir.
I think I was a yuck. And I remember I saw my grade and I was like, I'm good. Let's
And then
move
you
on.
became a lawyer.
Yeah, that became a lawyer. Right. I think it was physics 2.
Your most prized possession?
Wedding ring.
Okay.
That is
That's
the
a great
safest
answer.
That is
That
such a
is
good
great
answer. That was such a safe answer.
The best leadership advice you've ever received?
Don't play scared.
Oh.
Just go.
That's it. Just period.
Don't play scared. Just
Okay.
go. Yep.
That's great.
Great advice.
Please be sure to tune in to the Inside West Point Ideas That Impact podcast next month. Remember, you can find this podcast as well as the other podcasts, journals, and books hosted or published by the West Point Press at westpointpress.com. So until next time.